right. Hey, it is the Prospect Weekly Roundup. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Uh, and I am David Dayen in sort of red for the season. And with me today, staff writer of the American Prospect, Hassan Kanu. Hassan, how you doing?
Hello, David.
And happy holiday to you. Happy
Same to you.
Valentine's Day. President's Day on Monday. We'll be off. We have had, and we just put a little piece about this on the site, and I'll take you through the process of how we do headlines because I had completely not put together the fact that it's almost Valentine's Day, or it is Valentine's Day, and that we could have named this the Valentine's Day Massacre. And that's what we could have named this headline. Uh, Valentine's Day Massacre, of course, refers to a gangland hit by Al Capone. The Saturday Night Massacre is the reference to the Watergate era instance of President Nixon's functionaries firing a bunch of Justice Department officials before they could find one who was willing to fire the special prosecutor in the Watergate case. That person they found, by the way, was Robert Bork. He was the one that was willing to do it. And now we have the Thursday afternoon massacre, which we could have called the Valentine's Day massacre. Now I'm completely upset with myself. Um, but this involves a similar, well, I guess it's a mass resignation within the bowels of the Justice Department, both at the Southern District of New York and the Public Integrity Section of Main Justice over the attempt to end a case, an indictment, withdraw the indictment of Eric Adams, the New York City mayor, who was under indictment for just a litany of public corruption charges involving him receiving money from a foreign government, a straw donor scheme that was related to his election as mayor, and a host of other things. And apparently, there was another superseding indictment on the way that involved his destruction of evidence and obstruction of justice. And the Trump administration decided that they could cut a deal with Eric Adams because he was vulnerable, because he didn't want to go to jail, that they could say, hey, if you help us with our little immigration problem and get the city of New York to cooperate with us as we undergo these mass deportations, maybe we'll forget about that little indictment of yours. And usually these things are implicit, but it appears that this was extremely explicit. That Adams' lawyers were specifically saying, "This is what you have to do in order for us to drop the indictment." And the top officials at the Justice Department, put in by Trump, said, "Sure, okay." And then they set about finding someone to actually withdraw the case, dismiss the case. And one attorney after another refused to do it. At this point, we have seven prosecutors who have resigned as a result. And the latest information we have is that there's a meeting at the public integrity section where they have been told, figure out within the hour who's going to withdraw the case. And if nobody steps forward, we're going to terminate the entire public integrity section of the Justice Department. That was the threat that was made. So Hassan, you follow the courts. You follow this stuff pretty closely. Um, I mean, this seems very unprecedented to me. Obviously, we had the 1970s example with the Nixon White House, but this seems actually it goes even further, and it's even more explicit than Watergate, if that's even possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, first I should say you're right about the headline, by the way, as it's a key part of your job as any managing editor, right? It's like good puns, bad puns, inappropriate
No,
puns, cheesy puns. You got to get the puns in, David. Missed
I
opportunities.
know, I know.
But yeah, no,
That's
I
going to
think
haunt me.
yeah, I like the Thursday afternoon massacre. I mean, I think that's an appropriate way to frame it as, right? Yeah, seven officials, right? I think we really are sort of in somewhat uncharted territories, both in terms of the number of people that are declining these directives, these orders, and choosing to resign instead, often very publicly, often in very stridently worded letters, right? Not just publicly, but they're being quite critical. And it's not like we're talking about a bunch of lefties by any stretch of the imagination, right? We're talking about people with some folks with very serious conservative bona fides. Uh,
Absolutely. One of the U.S. attorney, the acting U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, which is where this prosecution is taking place, is a woman named Danielle Sassoon, who clerked for Antonin Scalia. She is a member of the Federalist Society, and she was made acting U.S. attorney by Donald Trump. And so that's the person who is saying, no, I will not accept this illegal order for you to engage in a quid pro quo with Eric Adams, and I'm just going to resign.
right, right. So I think, like I said, I think the first prong is, it's uncharted. We're in uncharted waters in that sense. The number of people, who these people actually are, and also, like you said, sort of how explicit the quid pro quos is here, right? And which actually reminds me, there's a similar kind of aspect of the story about the Mayor Adams's the underlying charges, right? That was a quid pro quo
Yeah.
with Turkey. It was also quite explicit. It's about plane tickets. It was
Yeah.
quite explicit and petty, right? It was
I
just some
remember
plane
there were
tickets.
chats where it was like the guy was talking to Eric Adams and said, hey, please get rid of all these texts between us that are describing this conspiracy. And Adams wrote back, I always do.
That's right.
Just
That's right.
the fact that we had that, like those texts, shows the stupidity of the whole thing. Like, yeah, you didn't delete it. We actually have them.
Right. So it was
Um,
not, yeah, not only did you, like you mentioned yesterday when we spoke, we were kind of laughing about the fact that many people here are taking notes on a criminal conspiracy, right?
right,
Yeah. Not only did they
right,
take notes on
and
a,
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. It's
And
not only that they take notes on a criminal conspiracy, they were explicitly told to then trash those notes after the
right,
notes were discovered, and then
right.
failed to do so, right?
That's that's very explicit in the Adams case, and it's very explicit in this attempt to dismiss it. There was a meeting where Adams lawyers were telling the lead Justice Department officials, we will do your immigration bidding if you drop this case. And notes were taken on the criminal conspiracy.
Right.
You're alluding to The Wire and Stringer Bell ripping those up. And Emil Bove, who's the acting deputy attorney general, did in fact take those notes away and rip them up. I mean, it's a very life imitates art kind of thing.
Right. So yeah. So there is also that pattern of Adams's sort of apparent misdeeds, if you will, not being done very slyly or inconspicuously. Now with a lot of stealth or yeah, or cunning.
Yeah, 100%.
But yeah. So I think it's unprecedented in both those terms. I would like to talk about what criminal statute might capture this situation. I think that I've been thinking about that question as it comes to the larger Elon Musk Doge situation, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a second too. But quite
Mm-hmm.
frankly, it is difficult to think about what statute applies here. There's certainly lots of ethical rules against sort of politically weighted decisions like this, right? Political
Right.
prosecutions, obviously. That's sort of the
Well,
most
the
the most
thing,
commonly known
the
ethical rule
the
that binds the executive branch.
yeah, I mean, the thing that one former federal employee said is that civil service laws, which apply not just to Justice Department officials, not just to federal prosecutors, but everybody in this civil service, say that employees who refuse to take actions that would require the individual to violate a law, rule, or regulation are protected. And that would include, any requirement that federal employees act impartially and not give preferential treatment to any private organization or individual. So, in this case, the attorneys resigned. But what they could have done is said, I'm not going to apply an unlawful order and then be fired and then sue under those civil service laws to say, you're not allowed to do that. Actually, I can refuse an unlawful order, and this order was clearly unlawful. So it remains to be seen whether anyone involved in this mess is going to trigger that. If they're just going to say no, I'm not going to do it. I mean, that's the purpose maybe of this meeting that apparently is happening as we speak with the public integrity section. So if a lot of attorneys in the public integrity section are fired, presumably they could contest that firing in a federal court using the laws that I just mentioned. So we'll see what happens there. The other part of this, and we have a question from Alan regarding, and I'll give the context, is that in New York State, the governor actually has the authority to terminate the term of a mayor, which is a pretty drastic authority. I mean, a mayor is elected by his or her constituents, and the fact that a governor, who yes is also elected, can sort of take that kind of authority. It's a really interesting, and I don't know exactly what I think of having that power vested in the governor, but they can do it. And this case, if there's any case that would exemplify the need or the desire to do this, it would be this one, because now we have a situation where, Eric Adams is essentially being blackmailed. This dismissal, the way that it was written without prejudice. And what that means is that the Justice Department could take up this indictment again at any time. So that's hanging over the head of Eric Adams, and he's agreeing to do a bunch of things for the Trump administration. Sort of under threat of being prosecuted if he doesn't, right? So and credibly prosecuted. I mean, the thing that Email Bove sent out, sort of justifying why they were going to do this, said that we have not looked. The quote was something like, "We have not looked into the actual specifics of this case, and we are not saying that there isn't a credible reason for the indictment." And then they go on to say, but this is interfering with Eric Adams' ability to carry out his duties as it relates to immigration. So, I mean, the quid pro quo is very explicit in the documentation. So if there's ever a reason for a governor to step in and say, hey, your mayor is being blackmailed and is going to do things transparently on behalf of the federal government, just this week, a civil suit was filed against Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, over refusing to cooperate on immigration. And Letitia James, the attorney general of New York, was also in that lawsuit, named in that civil suit. So, Hochul has every right to say, look, they're suing me over this. And now they've got sort of this willing captor in New York City that has already started to deliver on these promises. He says, I'm going to open up Rikers Island to immigrants, to detainees as a migrant detention center. So I think Hochul absolutely should basically remove Adams from office. I don't know what you think about it, Hassan.
Yeah, no, that gets to the point I was making. I think, and back to how explicit this is. I haven't actually watched the full interview, but Eric Adams did an interview on Fox News this morning, right?
Yeah.
Just to get how in your face this entire thing is, and it's almost, again, haven't watched the full interview, but in the clips I saw, it's almost like it's taken for granted. It's an underlying premise of the interview that the corrupt quid pro quo is already a done deal, right?
Oh,
They're sort of
completely. I
talking
mean, he's
beyond
with
that.
he's with Trump's immigration czar, Tom
That's right.
Homan. Like
That's
it's
right.
him and Tom Homan. And at one point, Tom Homan says, "Hey, if you don't follow what you said, I'm going to be in your office saying, what about our agreement?" I
That's right.
mean, you could not get more explicit about the quid pro quo than that.
Right. So to your question about the governor's authority, I think that really does get to the point of something that folks are talking about more and more, how Republicans and especially the right wing are more than willing, quite happy to push the bounds of the law, sometimes break clear legal lines, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes take unprecedented steps that the law may not even have contemplated, right, in order to
Uh-oh.
from Democrats to use the authority like the governor has, for example, in extreme situations like this, to take an extreme measure like removing a governor, or simply trying to prosecute folks for violations or sue folks for violations of civil service laws and breaking ethics laws and things like that. But that also raises the other issue, right? Which is that this administration has made a very concerted, fairly successful effort to install loyalists, right? At so many pressure points, choke points, right? Play the inspectors general, right? The people that exist in these agencies that could at least put out a report saying,
Yeah.
I think this official violated these series of ethics laws that apply to our agency. Some body that might review an action taken by an agency, or like actual prosecutors' offices, right? Folks are being removed and replaced with people we know are loyal to this president. And so it's really kind of a conundrum, and that also, I guess that sort of explains why this deal that looks corrupt from every angle is being done so explicitly. It sort of feels like they fully believe that they can, execute this and get away with it, right?
Yeah, and I want to bring in Pam Bondi into this because she's the Attorney General, and she, throughout her entire career, has shown herself to be a willing lackey for power. Whoever her allies are, whoever her donors are, that's how she's going to interpret the law in their favor, to their advantage. We saw this in Florida when she was Attorney General, and she fired the two prosecutors who were looking into foreclosure fraud. And that was on behalf of donors of hers who were caught up in that investigation. Just this week, just yesterday, in fact, she furthered something you had actually written about, Hassan, which is this TikTok law. She wrote to the heads of Apple and Google, who until this point had been blocking the download of TikTok on through their app stores because they were worried that this law, which had very clear guidelines and said you after 270 days, if TikTok isn't divested from its Chinese parent company, that anyone distributing this app will be liable for huge fines. And Donald Trump did an executive order directing the attorney general to not prosecute that essentially for 75 days. And yesterday, Bondi, because Apple and Google essentially thought that wasn't enough of a loss of liability for them, they were still blocking this from phones. Bondi wrote to Apple and Google yesterday and said, "I promise you, I'm not going to prosecute this law." And today, lo and behold, on your phone, you can download the TikTok app from the Apple store or the Google store. And so this is just another example of Pam Bondi just being willing to carry out whatever Donald Trump, decides he wants, regardless of whether or not that meets with the law.
Oh yeah, yeah. And before I touch on that, we have a question here from Alan
Oh, sure.
about dismissals with or without prejudice. That yes, that is entirely in the judge's discretion. Sometimes parties in a case ask for dismissal with or without prejudice. Sometimes they don't, and the judge simply decides, here's, you can bring this claim again, or you can never bring this claim again. So yeah, that's it.
Hassan,
The judge did not have to do this one way or another. The judge did that because they felt that that was the correct decision.
well, yeah, he hasn't. A judge hasn't seen this yet because they haven't actually, ordered the dismissal yet because they can't find anybody to do it. But the question is, could a judge reject dismissal entirely? I mean, that doesn't. Who would actually prosecute the case if they did that?
Sorry, am I misunderstanding the question? The way I understand the question is that it's
No, no,
asking.
that you understood it right. I'm asking a different
Hmm,
question.
maybe I'm misunderstanding your question
Okay,
then.
because the question is, so they put forward this order, and the judge obviously knows all the history that went behind it. Could he say, "No, you're not going to dismiss this case. You're going to keep this case open"?
Oh, gotcha. I see what you're saying. I don't know. I don't think a judge could direct a prosecutor to do that. I
Hmm.
understood Alan's question as a procedural, like dismissing any case, right? Like
No, that is
this case
correct.
is
That
over.
was his question, and the judge could certainly do that and say, "Look, you make up your mind here. You can't leave it open ended because of the implications of that." Would be a possibility. But anyway, back to the TikTok thing. So I mean, this is just another example of Bondi just taking on as the law whatever it is her superior officer wants it to be.
Yeah, I guess maybe the overarching themes of these stories we're talking about here are I don't have a term that captures it, but sort of the slow churn of the law, right?
Yeah.
Uh, um, and impunity, right? And I'm putting those next to each other, but because I guess you can't say impunity until the courts actually rule in a final way, right?
Right.
Appeals level, Supreme Court level, whether the Supreme Court decides to hear any one of these cases we've talked about or not,
Right.
then it becomes final. But there's also a famous quote about justice delayed, right? As well. So I think those are the two overarching themes about what we're talking about is that the administration has figured that they move fast and break things like folks in tech like to say, like the approach that
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
Elon Musk has clearly brought to the federal government workforce. That's to that the courts can't match that speed, right? And they may be able to accomplish their goals. Uh, uh, you know beyond a remedy, right? So by the time the court says
Right.
XYZ has to happen, their goal is already accomplished and cannot be reversed. That's not true in every case, but
Right.
it will be true in some cases that what's done can't be undone. You can undo certain other things, but
Yeah.
it
I
sort of
mean,
depends.
a good example is sort of the firings that have gone on throughout the federal government. So, some of those appear to be illegal. There were a lot of firings yesterday of what are called term employees who they have all the protections of civil service employees, but they have a fixed term. It's for 4 years or for 6 years, and there are certain standards by which they stay in their jobs, and a lot of those people were fired en masse yesterday. There's a thing about probationary employees who don't have the same civil service protections, but presumably under the law, they can only be fired for performance-based reasons. And a lot of those people were fired en masse, in fact, so hastily that at the CFPB, at least Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, they were fired with a form letter that didn't even have their names or job titles filled out. It just said "you name" in brackets with your job title are going to be fired effective date. They didn't even have a date of when they would be fired on it. So that could be challenged. But at that point, these people are out. Maybe they have another job. How exactly are you going to unring the bell with regard to that? And it's the same thing I think with IT systems. If those systems are changed or if information is deleted, how are you going to roll that back? So yeah, I think moving fast. The other line in Silicon Valley is ask forgiveness, not permission.
Permission, right?
So those kinds of strategies make it very hard for the sort of slow machinery of justice to keep up with it.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, and I think the Times in one of its podcasts recently described it as sort of folks at an elite level of society don't have to worry about sort of the same kinds of legal consequences that the rest of us do, right? You're not going to be, perp walked in front of some camera. You're not, the president got dictated the terms of just his being photographed when he was charged with a crime, right? The
Right.
former president at the time, right? But again, his status meant that he could go about it that way. So yeah, so I think impunity is a big theme here,
Yeah.
right next to
And
the
then and
fact that
then
the court sort of moves
defiance.
so slow.
And then isn't the other theme sort of defiance? So let's say even a slow moving court eventually comes to the determination that the president can't do something, whether it's freeze federal grants or uh, delete birthright citizenship or any of these things that we're starting to see injunctions about.
Right,
Let's say
right,
those are final, they exhaust all appeals. Uh, and the president says, "So what? What are you going to do about it? I'm going to keep doing what I want to do." That's that's kind of the third rail that nobody wants to touch, right? That's the topic where this week we saw JD Vance and some other people kind of intimate that executives have more power than what a judge can take away. And
right.
that's a really dangerous notion for our system of government.
Right. Both, I mean, both the president and the vice president intimated as much, and like you said, some other folks in the Republican Party also kind of declined to reject that idea, right? That you could just ignore a valid order from a court. So there's that's been put on the table very clearly. You're right that folks are thinking of it as a third rail and not talking about it. Maybe we won't talk about it much until it happens. And that was sort of the point I made in the piece I wrote that you mentioned about TikTok, right?
Yeah,
That the actions we're talking about and the sequence of events that you just described the last parts of started the day after the Supreme Court had ruled and thought it had resolved the TikTok, situation
yeah,
and whether or not TikTok needs to sell a majority share to some American owner, right? The court had said yes.
yeah,
Congress enacted a valid law, so two branches of government had spoken, and the then not yet inaugurated, soon to be president, decided that the law wouldn't be enforced, and that was what happened without much outcry, right? So,
yeah.
it's hard to say whether we're in that territory already or not, but we certainly should not be treating it as a third rail. We need to be talking about it because there's no reason the vice president would be saying this is okay if they weren't seriously contemplating it.
I'm just looking at a comment here from Justin Quinn. I would love to see an entire prospect podcast about AI and how it'll affect us in the US. Um, we have a piece coming. I'll give a sneak preview in our next issue that's going to be about AI and whether AI is in a bubble or not. Whether it's all hype or whether we're actually going to see some real advances. So maybe in the future, once we run that piece, we'll go ahead and bring that author on. I have another comment here from Ira Morgenstern. What happened to innocent until proven guilty? We heard about stories of fraud, alleged payoffs, waste, et cetera, where the carefully investigated facts and reports to substantiate the allegations. I believe, Ira, what you're referring to is, all these instances of Elon Musk going on to X and just unilaterally deciding that something is wasteful or fraudulent and saying we're going to delete that without any kind of scrutiny into where that's coming from. We're definitely seeing government by rando commenter on X, where a good example was this situation regarding condoms. It was like condoms to Hamas, $100 million for condoms to Hamas, and it turned out that this support for contraception was sent to Gaza, but not Gaza as in the Gaza Strip, but Gaza, a region of Mozambique, where they were attempting. It was part of an anti-HIV effort. And this week, Elon Musk was asked about that in the Oval Office. Like, none of what you said was true. There was no condoms for Hamas or anything. And I believe what he said is, look, we're moving fast and we'll get things wrong, but we'll fix them. So I mean that there you have it, right? That is the move fast and break things ideology in total, and that had a real effect. The fact that there was not this foreign aid for this particular region of Mozambique, that can have real effects on people's lives. Communicable diseases is what we're talking about here. So yeah, I mean, all of these things aren't really substantiated. There was another one yesterday that was supposed to be money given to Reuters for a particular reason. It was like, we're giving money to Reuters for disinformation, and it was about studying disinformation. It wasn't like for them to engage in disinformation. So, uh, you know, I think that a lot of these instances we're going to see essentially lies, half truths, evasions, things like that are used to justify cuts to programs, which, even if they were justified, could not be done unilaterally by the executive because that's not our system of government.
And I would say almost certainly could not also be done by a person, a private citizen outside of government that the executive has outsourced much of his power to, right?
Right.
Almost certainly. Um,
Yeah.
I think first I'll comment on the Musk interview that you talked about, and again to the point about sort of impunity and folks with an elite status. We're talking about the richest man in the world, right? In the interview, what was striking to me was that Musk would just sort of outright contradict himself, right? Just say
Right.
things that were plainly, provably untrue, right? We are being very, very transparent with everything we're doing, right?
Right.
Literally everything we know about Doge came from from anonymous sources in investigative reports in different in Wired and other news media, right? Literally everything we know about, including just their staff, right, came in investigative reports from anonymous sources. So there's no transparency. But when he's asked about that in the Oval Office or in the White House somewhere, he just says, "We are being fully transparent." And next question, all right? So there is
Right.
sort of this issue of, well, what's to be done about that, right? What's to be done about that? And it's almost as though you put yourself in that room, you put yourself in a reporter's shoes in that room. It's almost as though you either act collectively and you say, well, look, you have to answer this question in a better
Right.
way, or or someone has to sort of back up the last reporter and say, actually, I know you said you guys have been transparent, but what about this or that, and so forth and so on. But it's difficult to solve that problem, right? Because at the end of the day,
Yeah.
these officials and Elon Musk, who is not an official, knows that he can conduct himself that way. I can simply say something that is likely an untruth, to be generous about it, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna go back to my office and continue doing what I've been doing. And to the second point,
Yeah.
the question about you know, sort of applying the innocent until proven guilty framework into trying to cut out waste and abuse. That just brings to mind something a source, a staff attorneys at the Evergreen Action said to me in a piece that you and I were just working on. They'll be up on the site pretty soon, David,
Yeah.
about the end of the government's first environmental justice initiative to address this. And the point she was making, the part of the point I'm making in the piece is that because this is just a wholesale reversal of the Justice 40 program, lumping it in with the administration's anti-DEI efforts, right? Even though the Justice 40 program was explicitly designed to exclude consideration of race, right? It looks to deliver government benefits and federal monies and grants to do things like, patch up dams, rebuild roads, redo insulation, all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, to disadvantaged communities, but it doesn't consider race. It considers a whole range of other factors that indicate disadvantage. Nonetheless, that was lumped in with DEI and has now been wiped out. And part of the point that folks that work on the front lines of these issues were making to me is that this affects lots of people that are squarely within Trump's base, right? Rural voters in very
Right.
deep red states. So that just gets to the point. Yeah, this a lot of this is not being done carefully, and when you ask folks in the administration or Musk and folks at Doge about it, they just say, yes, it is. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting piece, and it will be up on the site soon. And if it does come up in the next half hour, we'll link to it on the side in the chat there. But yeah, Justice 40 was a really groundbreaking initiative, and it specifically said at least 40% of the investments that are being made, and particularly through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, which had a lot of climate related things, investments in it, that 40% of that money would be dedicated for these disadvantaged communities. And when the tool was created, as you wrote about, to sort of define what is a disadvantaged community under this initiative, it found that the majority of those were poor, rural, white areas, right?
That's right. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that just speaks to the point, And when I asked the EPA folks at the EPA about this, they gave sort of a standard line about that the president's order is based on a mandate from the voters to go after DEI policies, right?
Yeah.
And what we're talking about here, almost regardless of the fact that the administration has never defined what it means by DEI, would not fit
Yeah.
under however you can
They
conceive of
mean
what they
people of
mean by
color is what they
that.
actually mean,
Quite
right?
clearly.
I mean, I think I know what
Quite
DEI
clearly.
means,
Yeah. And
but
this clearly
but
doesn't
this is
fit. This doesn't
transparently
fit
not
in.
that. In fact, it's explicitly not that. It says we are not going to consider race. And yeah, so I think yeah, that's a really good story. And another example of this that I actually put together this week that was about the fact of this not thinking things through. So this gets a little bit technical, but they shuttered the CFPB, right? And the CFPB was initiated and established in the wake of the financial crisis. And one of the big things was that mortgages were being given out willy nilly. They were being given out to everybody. Anybody who could fog a mirror could get a mortgage. And so there were a lot of rules that were put in place that says if you give a mortgage to someone, you have to actually assess their ability to repay it. Like what a concept, right? Like if you give a mortgage to someone, they should be able to repay the mortgage. And mortgage bankers were apoplectic. They said, "How could you make us do assess the ability to repay? What are we going to do?" And so really, the government gave two choices. They said, okay, you can either assess the ability to repay and show your work and give it to us, or you can give plain vanilla mortgages in a narrow range in a certain interest rate, right? And this interest rate is known as APOR, or average price offer rate, something like that. I'm probably getting the acronym wrong, but it's something like that. So it's called APOR. So at some point, if that's the deal, like either I have to give you a bunch of documentation or I have to give mortgages within this certain interest rate range, somebody has to calculate that interest rate range. And the entity that is charged with calculating that is the CFPB, which was put on ice this week. And every week, CFPB puts out what are called the APOR tables, the average price offer rate table that says this is the rate and this is the range. And if you don't offer a mortgage in that range, you have to give us a bunch of documentation. And that is called a qualified mortgage. And when you're talking about the mortgage market, really only entities, the entities who buy mortgages on the secondary market, who provide the capital so that mortgages can be issued, they're only going to want qualified mortgages. They don't want to deal with the litigation risk any kind of legal risk of taking a mortgage that they thought was qualified, but it turns out it's not because the APOR table wasn't updated. So every Thursday this thing comes out, and we were on Monday. I started hearing from people like, "Are we going to get APOR tables because CFPB shut down? Is this going to seize up the mortgage market?" And I started asking around about this. And on Tuesday, CFPB wrote me and said, "Oh yeah, we found somebody who is going to calculate the APOR tables for us." So this was like this recognition that from the arsonists, the people who want to burn everything down, that, oh, actually we need this little thing. Like, regulation is actually pretty good because it structures markets and it tells them how they should be run. And if we don't have that regulation in the just sort of absence of everything in a free for all environment, that's going to destroy the economy and incinerate it. So it's a perfect example of this, right? If you don't think through the implications of what you're doing, then you could, when you're knocking down all the walls of the bureaucracy, you might knock down like a support beam and bring down the entire building, and you won't like that. So
yeah. I think to go back to the moving fast and breaking things ethos. If you're a tech entrepreneur or a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, moving fast and breaking things means, you are playing with people's money. You're probably playing with rich people's money, right? You're probably playing with the money of rich people who were gambling their money anyway, in a sense, right? I don't mean to be simplistic, but yeah. Um, Whereas when you apply that ethos to the federal government, it's not about stockholders and investors and that kind of thing, right? It's about services that people need to for their daily lives, right? Sometimes actual life and death, right? In terms of medicine and food aid and that kind of thing.
one hundred
So
percent when
yeah,
you're
so that,
talking
that
about this
speaks exactly to that.
foreign aid
Right.
budget.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, that just illustrates how sort of inappropriate that idea is. Well, if we mess up, we'll go back and fix it. When you apply that to the federal government, right? It doesn't quite
yeah,
work the same way as in like trying
people
to come
people
up with a
can
cool product for people to buy.
yeah, when you fix a bug on an app, maybe it's a little inconvenient and it pinwheels for a little while. When you screw something up in the federal government, people die, or people can't get food. Yeah, really, really important point. Hassan's piece that we were just talking about Justice 40 is now out. It's up at prospect.org, and we'll get that link over in the chat. Let's see, we got about 15 minutes or so left. Another thing that we wanted to talk about was eggs. Everyone's talking about the price of eggs here, and it's almost been risen to the level of parity a little bit. Like, I think there are some people on the left who have decided that all the, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries acting like egg market analysts is maybe not the best use of their time. But I wrote a piece today that says that this actually does matter, and where you can see it is in consumer sentiment. And if you look at the consumer confidence ratings, there's one put out by the University of Michigan, there's another put out by Morning Consult, and there's some others. They're all showing plunging consumer confidence as the sort of realization that Trump is not necessarily focused on inflation as a near-term initiative is coming to light. And the most important thing here is that future expectations of inflation have gone way up. And these can kind of become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're a producer, if you're a company that sells a product, and you see that people expect inflation to go up in the next month, and you're setting your prices for your new rollout of your product, you're probably going to set those prices higher because I'm just meeting the expectations of the marketplace. The market expects these prices to go up. Also, future wage setting. If you're having a wage collective bargaining agreement, or even in just the regular marketplace. Oh, people expect prices to go up, so they're going to want higher wages. So I'll do the higher wages, and I'm also going to do the higher prices. That's the vicious cycle that you can get into if inflation expectations are not anchored. And we saw them jump at the highest level, I think, in 15 years over the last month. And why are inflation expectations jumping? Well, what's Trump talking about? He's talking about tariffs, which are effectively taxes on individuals who buy imports. He's talking about deportations, which takes away, pieces of the labor market, makes labor more expensive. The only thing that he's been talking about in terms of lowering prices is we're going to drill, baby, drill. And in fact, we've seen that gas prices have gone up because oil companies have said, we're not going to drill, baby, drill. We have a good thing going right now. We have good, solid prices that enable us to make money, and we're not going to overproduce and therefore destroy our own seed corn. So all of those things are contributing to this unanchored inflation expectations, which again can feed on itself. And it's leading to a situation with this severe reduction in consumer confidence. And, some people might say, yeah, so what? Consumer confidence. We're in a situation where the government's on fire and we're seeing all these authoritarian power grabs on the part of the executive. But I do think that the consent of the governed is what allows for those power grabs. And if Trump starts to lose popularity after this sort of honeymoon period because he's not paying attention to the thing that people say that they want, which is, certainly not runaway inflation to rear its ugly head again. Then as you lose that trust with the electorate, you lose the ability to be maximal in terms of what you're doing with respect to the government. I don't know if you agree, but it seems to me that we shouldn't lose sight of these economic concerns.
Yeah, I definitely think that's something to keep an eye on. I think it's interesting. I think you definitely made the point in your piece that basically look at some point, people will be feeling this and will start to feel fed up and start. There's an obvious place to point the finger, right? The man in the seat, the man in the office. What do you make of the fact that I don't know when this was, but in the past week or so on Truth Social, uh, uh, there was a day when the numbers shifted and Trump tweeted something about Biden's inflation, right? In other
Yeah.
words, blaming the price of eggs that you wrote about in your piece on the last administration. How do you
I
think
mean,
that's going to go over? That seems to be like his strategy to explain this.
yeah, I'd say two things. There's a kernel of truth to it because it's the January inflation numbers, right? And Biden was in office for 2/3 of that time, and things take time to take root. So at one level, yes, this is the last vestiges of Biden inflation. Uh, the the second thing I would say, I guess I have 3 points. The second thing I would say is that if you look at the reasons why inflation, particularly, let's just stick to eggs, is going up, some of that is due to the kinds of things that Trump is engaged in. And the first is neglecting the avian flu. Firing people for science-based reasons, reducing communication between departments who are trying to work on avian flu. It's at least there's some consensus that the reason that we have an egg shortage right now is because millions of birds, egg-laying hens, have been killed because they've contracted the avian flu. So on that level, if we think that in the next several months this is going to get worse, it's because Trump isn't really doing anything about this avian flu crisis. The second part of that is that there are companies. If you look at the actual reduction in flocks, there isn't. It's large, but it's not nearly as large as how much the price has gone up. So, like the reduction in flock relative to 2021 in 2024 is like 5 or 6%. And that's not insignificant. But the price of eggs from 2021 to 2024 has gone up like 12-fold, right? So there's a competition angle here. And to the extent that Trump is not focused on the consolidation in the egg market, then he is also going to be to blame in the future. But the third thing I would say is that this is going to be Trump's main rhetorical weapon to challenge this fading consumer sentiment. He's going to say this is all Biden's fault. He stuck me with the mess, and we're trying to fix it, but we haven't been able to fix it yet. And that works maybe in the first month of an administration. Ronald Reagan in 1980 pointed to Jimmy Carter for the entire period of his first term, like all 4 years. Even in 1980 or in 1984, he was saying like, well, we're trying to get out of the Carter malaise. 4 years after he had plenty of room to make changes in the U.S. economy. So I believe that is going to be Trump's rhetorical take. He's going to blame things on Biden, even if Biden is not in office. I do think there will be diminishing returns for that. And that ultimately what we have seen historically is that people blame the individual who is president for their economic circumstances. What happened in 84 is that the economy started to turn around in the last year of Reagan's first term, and he rode that to reelection. So in this case, Reagan was pretty unpopular. 82 was a very bad midterm for him because the economy was really bad. And even though he was saying Carter, Carter, Carter that whole time, he wasn't able to stop that midterm tide. And I think that if Trump tries that.
Was that a situation where he was getting pushback even from conservatives and folks who are normally supportive of him about that excuse or that
Well, I mean,
finger pointing?
Yeah, I mean, I think people were generally angry. Unemployment was as high as 10% in Reagan's first term in 1982, particularly in poor areas, particularly in urban areas, and it was reflected in the election result. So, particularly in the Senate, where Reagan, I believe in 1980, Republicans had won back the Senate and they lost it in 1982. So, I think that Trump is going to run into trouble if he's seen as paying attention to DEI and paying attention to those kinds of things when prices start to spiral out of control, or if there's mass layoffs. I mean, the thing about firing a bunch of people in the federal government is that's going to show up in the job statistics, right? And it's going to, and we're seeing that across the economy. Companies like Ford have said, okay, if these tariffs on steel and aluminum are going to go into place, we're going to have to lay off people. If you're not giving us the support for electric vehicles that we had been promised and that we had budgeted for, we're going to have to lay off people. And I think you're seeing that in pockets of the economy in such ways as that could reflect on the jobs numbers. So I think there are a lot of kind of moving parts here. All right. We got about 10 minutes. And, I did want to ask you, because obviously you cover the courts a lot. We haven't seen any case go up to the Supreme Court level. I'm not sure that we've even gotten to the appellate level with any of these,
There's been one case I think that the First Circuit ruled on. I'm there's so many of them, the actual cases escaping my mind. I can look this up quickly, but please keep going.
That's fine. Yeah, so I mean, we haven't gotten there yet, but I know that you've been following, whether or not this court, which obviously, I'm talking about the Supreme Court, very conservative. 3 of the justices put on there by Donald Trump, much more conservative than it was during Trump's first term, because he never had the benefit of Amy Coney Barrett replacing Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the vast majority of his first term, except for the very end. Uh, and I'm wondering what you think, how you think they're going to react. There is a flurry of lawsuits, I think over 50 lawsuits over various aspects of the things Trump has put in place in the first 4 weeks of his administration. And there are sure to be many, many more. You know, one thing that I think is that the Supreme Court isn't going to be able to handle all of those. Like they're not going to actually rule on many of those. They're going to let the lower court rulings stand. And then some of them they're going to take up. And I'm curious what you're looking at in terms of how that's going to transpire. Like, what are you expecting?
Yeah, well, one of the cases that has at least touched an appeals court is actually one of the ones that I think is most important that the court probably will take up eventually. The appeals court hasn't actually ruled on the issue in the case, which is about the funding freeze and impoundment. Uh, but what the First Circuit ruled on was about a temporary restraining order, basically an injunction
Right.
blocking it or pausing it, not whether or not it is lawful to issue the order that the president did, right? Freezing funds. But eventually the lower courts will rule on that, and then the appellate court will rule on that, and then, as you said, the Supreme Court will have to decide whether or not that ruling stands or it takes up the case. And I would imagine that that'll be one of the cases that the court does take up, because there's precedent for presidents trying to basically enact policy through impoundment, basically
Right.
in the past, and the court didn't issue a clear ruling on that on it then, and obviously now the issues come up again and sort of seems to need a clear ruling, right? That you can
Right.
you can be pretty sure that the Trump administration wants the Supreme Court to rule directly on that question itself. Can the president what can the president do in terms of the funds after Congress enacts a law, uh, uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, exercises its power of the purse? What then can the president do as the executive? So yeah, I fully expect that to go up to the court. It's hard to say in like you said, there's a lot of cases, so it's sort of hard to say, oh, I think the court's generally going to be this way or that way in favor of Trump's policies or against him. Obviously, there's a pattern in the past, and since Trump became president and made three appointments, right, that the court often, including in cases where almost every lawyer thinks the law cuts the other way, like the immunity case, right, rules in favor of Trump or the Republican Party. Uh, it's hard for me to not feel inclined to say that their number of executive orders the administration has taken this time that even this court might draw a line at. We've seen in some cases that Barrett we mentioned and Roberts often might cross over and side with the liberals, not so much any of the other Republican appointees on the court. But I would imagine a couple of these issues, including the funding freeze issue, could draw support from Roberts or Barrett, if not both.
Yeah, that one obviously is pretty important. We have documents have been unearthed showing that not just Roberts, but actually Brett Kavanaugh, when they worked in the executive branch, both supported the notion that Congress has the exclusive authority on spending, and basically telling their colleagues, no, you can't cancel this spending just because you don't like it. And the Impoundment Control Act of 1974, which is sort of the controlling authority here, and it governs the very strict process by which a president can attempt to rescind or delay spending, with the ultimate authority being vested in Congress on whether they agree. Roberts and Kavanaugh in those various studies, documents, had said that, yeah, the Impoundment Control Act is what governs this, and we can't go beyond that. So that's going to be a titanic fight at the courts. Birthright citizenship is going to be a titanic fight at the courts. I don't know what they're going to do on all these payment system things. That seems like uh, they might consider that sort of internal processes of the executive branch. Although the Privacy Act of 1974 is also pretty clear in terms of what certain public personal information, who gets access to that and things like that. So Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be a flurry of this stuff. And one interesting thing that I just saw, one of the big cases that I actually do think the Supreme Court may rule in a way that overturns precedent is the case known as Humphrey's Executor, which is about whether you can fire individuals in independent commissions. And it was around a case where there was an attempt to fire someone at the Federal Trade Commission and for something other, for at the will of the president, essentially. And it was ruled that no, the president doesn't have that authority. The head of the FTC, the chair of the Federal Trade Commission, came out in the last day and has said, I think Humphrey's executor was wrongly decided and it should be changed. So this is the head of the independent commission that is saying, yeah, none of my people should be protected by this rule. I think this is an attempt, and if it's successful by the court, to essentially have stacked commissions that have no Democrats on them. And we're already seeing this challenge at the NLRB, at the Federal Election Commission, and many others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All
no,
right.
this, I mean,
Well, yeah, go ahead.
this court has certainly, I think the court has definitely taken, in some ways, a pretty expansive view of the executive's power, especially over the workforce. I definitely don't mean to suggest they've authorized the kind of things we're seeing currently from Doe specifically, but in general, they've taken an expansive view, the conservatives on the court. I do think in the case where they ruled on the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, the president's power to fire the general counsel, which they said, yes, he can do that whatever he wants to, and for whatever reason he chooses. I do think they distinguished the board members from the general counsel.
They they did,
Mhm.
but Trump fired a board member anyway,
That's right.
and she is contesting that now in court. Gwen
That's right.
Wilcox is actually contesting that, and that will probably be the test case that decides whether that precedent of Humphrey's executor stays or
Right.
goes.
Well,
So
the
we'll
fact
be
that the fact
watching.
that they distinguished the board members suggests that they might have arguments or reasons to say,
Yeah,
look, this position is different. But again,
right.
that's not a case where I would say, it leans clearly this way or the other. No clue what would
Yeah, it
happen
depends on the
in that
statute
case.
too. It depends on the statute.
Depends
I
on the
mean,
particular
in the
agency. That's right.
NLRB's case, the statute is very clear that
Hmm.
board members can't be fired by the president. CFPB in Celia law, the Supreme Court said yes, you can fire the head of the CFPB at the beginning of your term if you want. Anyway, we'll be watching all of that. Hassan, thank you so much for being here, staff
Of
writer at
course.
the American Prospect. And we will be back next week, as always, with another edition of the Weekly Roundup. Thank you all for being here. We'll put this video up on the website at prospect.org very soon. So have a great rest of your day.